So, a little bit of my backstory, continuing on the religious trauma thing. So, my parents were divorced when I was 6 months old. My mom left my dad when I was 6 weeks old. So, my mom always wanted wholesome. The term wholesome is one that she used a lot, and it always comes to mind for the ideal image in my mom's head, or in my head about my mom. So she was a single mom. We lived on a farm in northern Pennsylvania. She had a trailer that was on my grandparents' property. And she was a nurse, and so she would work constantly. Eventually, we moved down to Tampa, Florida, where she put me into, I believe it was a Baptist school. I will not be giving names or exact locations on anything because, yeah. So I was in Tampa. I was in what I believe was a Baptist school, and I don't remember anything negative about that place whatsoever. I remember good things. I remember I stayed in what must have been a daycare program or something like that at the school after school, and I remember waiting for my mom to come and get me. She'd check me out sometimes, and she'd take me to go get Chinese food or Mexican food. That was kind of our little thing. I don't recall ever going to church in Florida, ever. Eventually, we moved back up to Pennsylvania, and my mom put me in, what was it? It was another Baptist school. I'm sitting in my bed because I can't walk. I'm looking for something. I don't know where I put it. So she put me in another Baptist school, and it was not very long before I was friends with a girl there. Wait, yeah, okay. I remember the teacher scaring the living hell out of everybody, or at least it scared me, because she was talking about the return of Jesus and how the earth was going to split wide open, and how, there was going to be all this terror and everything else on the earth. I was 6. That's a lot for a kid to take in. So I hadn't heard much about that before. I think I probably had a premise in my mind of what the rapture was, but I don't know exactly. That school, I eventually went to, let me think. So that was first grade. Second, third, and fourth grades, I was in a Lutheran school. I don't remember anything bad about that place. Yes, I do. But it didn't have to do with religion. It had to do with understanding where my place was in the world. When another kid was, I found out that something that I had been chosen to do was only because another kid couldn't do it. And that was crushing. And then the original school that I had gone to in Pennsylvania, the first one, I went back to for 5th grade because the Lutheran school only went up through 4th grade. So I went back to that school, and I remember I had a friend who, I guess you could say she was a friend at that age. Now I'm looking at it and going, oh, yeah, little kid. And I remember in that school becoming very aware very quickly. So at this age, I'm what, 9-ish, I think. I remember being aware very quickly that we were not good enough. My so-called friend let me know how terrible it was that I was from a broken home. It was made very clear that my mother was no good because she had been divorced. Oh. And that we did not have money. So just all of those social constructs were very, they imprinted very strongly on my character. I never could understand, well, why weren't we good enough? So what? She's divorced. And what's funny is that my friend that told me that, her mother was divorced from her father. In fact, I don't think her mother was actually ever married to her father, and he was in prison for murder. So everything went just fine after she married a rich doctor. Now, what I did understand at the time, and I'm not entirely sure how I knew it, but I did have the comprehension that that's not something that my friend came up with out of her own mind. That's something that she heard the adults talking about. It was spoken either to her or around her. So there was that. It was definitely a social hierarchy. It was definitely a church-based hierarchy. And we didn't go to that church. We didn't have anything to do with them other than I went to the school. I didn't go to Awana's. I remember going one time, and it was not that impressive to me. My family we were farmers. We were poor farmers. My aunt and my mom and my uncle grew up poor. It was just, and money has always been one of those things that to me it's there to pay your bills. It's there to keep your lights on and put food on your table and pay for the things that you need. And if you have extra to go and play and you work for it and you earn it, have at it. But other than that, I don't give a flying shit about money one way or another. I just don't. I never could give a rat's ass about social status. And it certainly didn't make any sense to me why there should be any kind of a social status when it comes to a church or a church school, because that is not what was in the Bible. Now, backing up on a different segment here, at that age, as soon as I was able to read, and even before I could read, my grandmother had a Bible, and I remember being 3, 4, 5 years old. Yes, I can remember back that far. Taking my grandmother's Bible and sitting out on the porch and looking at the pictures that were in the Bible and looking at the maps, looking at, obviously reading once I was capable of reading. I would read the Bible itself. And there was a lot of it that I wasn't capable of understanding just yet. But what I could understand was there's several different places, Old Testament and New Testament, that teach you what does a Christian look like? How does a Christian behave? What's the way that a Christian should talk? What's the way that they should speak to each other and treat each other? How do you share? I remember reading in the book of Acts about the first church and how it was put together, and how they shared everything they had, and they treated each other with love and kindness. And I remember all that. I would also read the information in hold on, I'm trying to open the water bottle. In the beginnings of the Bible, or the chapters of the Bible, excuse me, where it would talk about the context of how this was written, what was the audience, when, what was happening in the times. So for as long as I can remember, I studied, generously studied. I studied, even as a very young child, comparisons in translations, because there were several different translations. My grandparents had had a subscription to National Geographic, so I would go into the library of National Geographics, and I would look for Bible stories. I would look for anything under the I keep getting messages popping up. I would look for anything that was under the context of biblical or spirituality or whatever. So even as a kid, little kid, I was always drawn to that. And we'll say my inclination towards witchcraft was not something that I could have had any kind of a label on at that point. It's not something, because when I was a kid, there was no internet. There were no cell phones. There was a library. There were National Geographics, stuff like that. Reader's Digest, 2 TV channels if the weather was right and the bunny ears with tinfoil were positioned the right way. So there was not a great deal of outside influence in any way. However, my witchcraft story and path is not something that is specific to what I'm trying to talk about here, so I'm going to pretty much leave it out of it. What I could see happening in the schools, and the way that people behaved, and the way that people would speak, and then the two-faced, how the parents would talk one way in front of the kids, but they would talk totally different in front of the other parents or in front of the pastors. I saw so much of people not practicing what they preach, not walking out what they said they believed in. And when we'd have to go to chapel and we'd have all these different, memorize these different Bible verses and everything, I'm thinking, if God said this stuff, why aren't you doing it? When you're handing me a Bible and you're handing me my workbooks and everything else that have chapter and verse in it, this is how you do this, and you're not doing it. It was very clear as a kid that this was all show. Okay. But I never had a problem believing in God. I never had a problem believing in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's something that it was just the knowing and the understanding comprehension of the divine has always been in me, and it's been so easy. It's not something that I've ever had to struggle with. Although I have later in life come to the point where I would sit and ask myself the questions of what do I believe and why, and really break it down. But that's another story. So, so there was that. And then the other thing was, I knew my family was different. I knew our close neighbors were different because, and I didn't have a name for it until a couple years ago. But they would behave in the way that I would read about the Jews, the Hebrews behaving about in the Old Testament. So the Sabbath in my family was sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, where they did as minimal work as possible. They would prepare meals a day ahead of time. They would make sandwiches a day ahead of time. They wouldn't do dishes until after the sun went down. Obviously, they had a farm and there was things that they had to do because of the animals. They had to be fed. They had to be milked. But things like, working the fields and things like that, that didn't happen on a Saturday. They did not eat pork. They did not eat shellfish. God was not referred to as God. Jesus was barely ever spoken of. There was Yahweh or Yahshua or the Messiah. There was not, it was just very Jewish tradition behavior, but they weren't Jewish. So I was always very confused as to what the hell are you? I found out just a couple years ago, and I'm 43, so obviously it's taken a while, but I found out just a few years ago that it was basically Assemblies of Yahweh. Now, my mom didn't follow that. And Mom didn't take me to church. However, when we would go visit my family in southern Pennsylvania, we're all Pennsylvania Dutch. My family has been in the country since before the country existed, since the 1600s. We have very, very detailed records of everything. And they all came over from Germany. So Germany is primarily, they have a lot of Lutherans. So my family in southern Pennsylvania, there was a lot of Brethren. There was a lot of Mennonite, not Amish, but a lot of Mennonite. And, we go to our family reunions and I would see the Mennonites there with the dresses and, the hair coverings and things like that. And I thought, okay, so I understood that there was something that was different there. I understood that what my family was, although they never went to a church ever, as far as I can recall, I think my grandmother and my aunt went with me to my Girl Scout leader's wedding, and that's the only time that I can recall them being in a church. So I know that they read their Bible every day. They were very faithful people, but they didn't go to a building to carry out that faith. I never saw why they needed to. I could read the Bible for myself and I could see where it would say, don't neglect the assembling of yourselves together. And my understanding of that was for the purposes of edification, for the purposes of being with like-minded people, for the purposes of growing. But I've never read anywhere in the Bible personally where it's a hard and fast commandment to go to a building on a specific day of the week. That's beside the point. So, I can recall my great-grandmother took me to their Little Brethren church a couple of times, and I was quite interested, and we were down there a lot over the summer, and I took on my own, and we're talking at this age, I'm 7, maybe, ish. I was taking the confirmation classes to be brethren. Okay. All right. So there's that. Then my when I was 11, my mother left Pennsylvania to move to Florida to go be with her now husband. Now, her husband and his family were all Catholic. Very strict Catholic, went to the Catholic schools, crucifixes all over the place. However, he did not go to the church. He had some beef with the church at some point in time, and I never did know why. So he had nothing to do with the church. Okay, well, this is another religion to be interested in. So when we moved to the little town we moved to, I had just turned 12. And it was a very small town. And over summer and on Sundays during school, I would walk across town alone to go to Mass every day. I took the Catholicism's confirmation classes, the catechism classes and everything. I took all of those. I would spend my free time, and this is no bullshit. I know I'm a bizarre child, but I would spend my free time going over to the convent, and there were 3 old nuns that lived there. They were probably in their 60s, late 60s, early 70s at the time. And I would just hang out with them, and I would ask them to teach me. And they did. And I mean, I spent countless hours with 70-year-old ladies learning about Catholicism. When it came time to, even though I was taking the confirmation classes, and they were scheduling the actual confirmations, when it came time to doing that, I was weighing the teachings that I had been receiving at the Catholic Church against what I could read for myself in the Bible. I never understood the scripted portions of the Catholics. I never understood where Jesus specifically said not to pray repetitive prayers so your voice can be heard. Then why is there a rosary? I didn't understand why the Catholic Bible is different from the Bible. And just even as a child at that age, just going through and putting pen to paper in my mind, so to speak, it didn't add up. The stuff didn't work. What the Bible taught was different from what I was taught in the Catholic Church. So I wasn't going to join the Catholic Church, even though I was very intrigued by learning about it. Okay, so then I started school in this town. It was a real culture shock for me to have gone from private Christian schools to public schools, because kids cussed, didn't have to wear dresses, and this is a school that's in the middle of Central Florida. I was in the fucking Bible Belt. So church was obviously a very big thing. In my school, most of the time you didn't get homework on Wednesday nights because they figured you were going to be going to church on Wednesday night. It was mostly Baptist, good old Southern Baptist. So I went several times to several different Southern Baptist churches over the years. Many, many, many times I went. And it always seemed to me like they enjoyed being told they were going to hell. Like it made them gives them the warm fuzzies. All the fire and brimstone and very legalistic in the sense of just the strictness and what went and what didn't go. And I couldn't understand, I couldn't rectify for myself why it was okay to have such a holier than thou attitude. Why was it okay to look down on people if they didn't meet XYZ criteria? Why is it okay to be a snob? What did going to church make you as a person? Well, it didn't. It was part of social constructs. It was part of the culture. And being a kid that came at a young age from the north to Central Florida, and I didn't go to a church, I didn't go to their church, it was very, very obvious that there were cliques and groups, and you either belonged or you didn't. And I sure as shit didn't. I went to, how old was I? Okay, backing up. So I started going to a different church that was kind of like I want to say it was like a Pentecostal based. I'm not entirely sure, but it was much more of what some people would call a seeker-friendly church. It catered a lot more to younger people. They didn't have quite the stuffiness from the Baptist church. They had a lot more music and not so many hymns and things like that. Oh, let me back up. I can remember one solitary time when I lived in Florida. Okay, sorry, I had a little interruption. So I remember one solitary time when my mother took me to a Methodist church in Florida. I think it was Florida. And they started clapping or getting excited or something for some reason. I don't know what it was. And I, started clapping a little bit. And I looked up at my mom and shh, we don't move. We don't make noise. We don't do these things. I had another little interruption. Sorry, my kid just got out of the bathtub and meandered on in here, so I might have some interruptions. It's gonna happen. I'm not editing everything out. So anyway, Mom was, we don't talk, we don't make noise, we don't show emotion, we don't show excitement, we do none of that. Okay. Why? Why not? If you're happy about something, shouldn't you show that you're happy about something? Now, cognitively, I understood all of this stuff as a child. It was very easy for me to grasp. It was also easy for me to grasp context, culture, times, different languages that things were written in. Back off.
Are you making a TikTok?
No, it's not a TikTok. All of that was very easy for me comprehension-wise. So anyway, I started going to this a little bit more laid-back church, and I don't know what kind of church it specifically is. I don't think I ever really paid attention to that. It wasn't for me. They put on a big show every year in the area, and I was part of it one year, but that didn't work, and then I had a whole ugly upheaval in my life when I was about 15. So I never ended up going back to that church. I actually went back to Pennsylvania for about 9 months. And then when I came back, I got into a group of pretty decent Christian kids, and I want to say they were legit in their intentions and their thoughts and and this was when the purity culture was getting really big. Or you do what was it called? some kind of purity ring or something like that. I forget. But they seemed to be very legit. And we actually started a kids' youth group that had nothing whatsoever to do with a church. Shh. It had nothing to do with any affiliation with any church. It was a bunch of kids, and we brought different types of study manuals and devotional books, and we would just sit around together and we would listen to music, and we would, on our own, for ourselves, we would study the Bible, and we would talk about what it meant to be a Christian. And that went on for a while, a couple months. And I remember at one point there was actually a revival type thing that was in the public school. And, they did the call for everyone to get saved. So, I raised my hand, I went up, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go full bore into this Christian thing. I'm going to do everything I can, right? Because it had pretty much been academic at this point. So, I was ready to make some spiritual moves, is, what I was thinking at the time. And then I remember I love you. You scoot. No, you are not. You don't go in my videos. Because you're little. I don't put you on YouTube, and I'm not going to. I don't put my kids on YouTube. Stop it. Don't baby talk. I remember that was the time that kids would go out to the flagpoles in the morning to pray. Move back over there and stop. So that next morning, I went out to the flagpole, and some of my friends were, what the hell? And I can remember someone going, hey, Christian girl, 666. And, all that. And I was just like, Jesus loves you. I think what I was doing, my seeking of true spirituality was very real. It was very real. My seeking of God was very real. But I was also very driven by my witchy side. But back then, it was not something that I didn't understand it. I couldn't get good information on it, because when you're in the fucking Bible Belt, you can't just go into the library and find books on witchcraft. So it was very much an underground type of thing. It was very much, I'm really feeling this. This is what's happening. I know these things. I see these things, all this different stuff. But that's just across the board evil. No matter what, get the fuck away from it. So, I love you. Scoot. You're not going to be in my video. Scoot. So where do I go with that? I'm trying to find the points to connect my spirituality. I don't know how to do it. At late 15, that was kind of the way to go. I went to a camp. I forget the name of the camp, but I'm actually still friends with the counselor. He wasn't a counselor. He was part of a group that came there called Master's Commission. And we had some really cool shit happen there. We were there at this camp for a week. It was really inspiring. It felt good. It sounded good. That was the year that Mike Tyson bit Evander Holyfield's ear. I remember that was replayed a lot. So we're in the era now of Jesus Freak. When DC Talk came out with Jesus Freak and Jars of Clay came out with the album Flood, and Jackie Velasquez had just come out, and, so, okay, hey, this is cool. So the music I like the music. This is not church hymny shit, which, I'd rather swallow sand. This was cool. It started to be geared more, or at least in my area, it started to be geared more towards younger people. The adults did not support this. Of course, I'm Gen X, and the adults really didn't support a damn thing that we did. My parents never could give a shit where I was at, as long as I wasn't embarrassing them or doing something to get myself into trouble that they were going to have to clean up. I was always one of the outcasts, the underdog types. I was not wanted or part of any of the cliques. So, I always felt like I landed on the outside of things. Now, my best friend, she was a practicing witch. She still is. 30 years later, she still is. So, it was a very interesting time, the whole coming of age thing, trying to figure out who you are, where you are, what you believe in, and why and how and everything. It was interesting. I had a lot of really heavy personal shit going down through my teenage years. It was not easy. And for reasons I'm not going to get into, I had left my parents' house right after I turned 18, before I had even graduated from high school. And I moved in with what turned out to be an absolutely vile, evil, disgusting piece of shit. And we ended up moving out of the town. He was very abusive, and he had no use for church or religion or anything of the sort. So, if I wanted to go to church, I'd have to walk the 7 miles into town and walk back. I was pregnant, had a baby then. I couldn't get to church. And I remember one day the piece of filth had gotten himself fired from yet another job. And he sat at the kitchen table and he raised his hand to God and he cussed God and he says, "What'd you do that for, you son of a bitch?" And I was just like, oh, I don't want to be anywhere near you when this comes back at you. So really, from the time I was about 17, religion just stopped for me. Church attendance stopped. Now I'm still in the Bible Belt at this point, so, there's no escaping it. And with all the troubles that I had as a kid, regardless of whether or not I was in the church, these people are still around. They're still everywhere. It's still, what it is. And the way that I was treated was very disgusting. Back up.
Yay.
Trying to be obnoxious about it. I was treated very much like trash. I never knew any kind of... Okay, now stop. I never knew Christian love. I never benefited from any Christian virtues. What I know is that I was treated like trash. I was looked at like trash. I was talked to like trash. I was not wanted. I was not welcome. And they all made it really fucking clear. Oh, I forgot one. Back up. With a guy that I was seeing in high school, I went to a Pentecostal church. Had not been to a Pentecostal church before. Wow. So, this old, fat, red-faced, sweaty preacher who was God's gift to the world came up, and they were doing that laying on hands thing. Well, this fat bastard comes up and he just whaps me right in the forehead. And I mean, like, hard enough. I thought he was going to knock me down. He fucking hit me in the forehead. And all this. And I'm like, I know this is tongues. I know what you're trying to do here. I realize that you recognize yourself as being a conduit of God. But biblically, this is not how this goes. This is not what's in the Bible. And it was such a show. It was such a fucking show. And I had no interest whatsoever in going back to that place. They ended up with a different preacher a couple years later. And I actually invited a couple of friends of mine. And there was a group of guys there, one of which is my husband now. And they were kicked out of the church and told to never come back because they were smoking on the property. Please do tell me all about the love of Jesus while you tell me that I'm not fit to hear about the love of Jesus because of smoking.
I want to give you a smooch.
Stop. That tells me a lot right there. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up. This is my personal background in religion up until 20-ish. Okay. So that's where we're at, and I will pick it up another time and fill you in on the continuing saga of absolute and utter bullshit and the excessive amounts of damage that comes from it.